If you agree that people should never judge others by appearances, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from, because today's story is one you won't forget. They thought she was just another girl in a parking lot, just another face, just another passerby who would look away like so many do when someone is being mistreated. They didn't know she was Lieutenant Commander Alyssa Gaines, 28 years old, a Navy SEAL with more classified missions than most officers see in a lifetime. But that day, before her identity meant anything to anyone, before titles and honors changed how they looked at her, there was only a moment of pure disrespect that would cost them everything. The day began like any other, and the teaser of this story started not with medals on a wall or the roar of a battlefield, but with something much quieter. A pair of janitors on the early shift at the local university found a backpack sitting upright just outside the student union, dirty, scuffed, but clearly placed, not dropped. Their first thought was lost property, their second, curiosity, their third, disbelief, because inside that pack were service coins and a commendation ribbon that didn't belong at a school, let alone in a forgotten corner of a campus walkway. They turned the items into campus security, and by noon the story had begun to circulate. Someone here was military, someone high up, someone whose history wasn't obvious. But that teaser, that hint of something bigger, was still whisper-level gossip among staff and never connected to the young woman walking across the parking lot that afternoon, carrying nothing more intimidating than a grocery bag and her car keys. Alyssa had come only to meet her younger sister for lunch, a quiet break from the tempo of Navy life. But on the way and she saw it happen. The sudden squeal of tires, the crunch of metal, and the stunned expression of a freshman girl standing beside a now dented blue compact car. Two male students, athletes by their lettered jackets, laughed loudly as if wrecking someone's vehicle was hilarious. The girl they had hit didn't move, didn't yell, didn't confront them. She simply froze the way people do when they've learned life is easier if you don't make noise. Alyssa walked over. Not fast, not aggressive, just calm, grounded, the way soldiers who have seen too much tend to move. She placed a hand lightly on the younger girl's arm, steadying her. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice soft. But before the girl could form a response, the athletes turned as if interrupted by something beneath them, and one of them snapped, "Back off." The tone wasn't just irritated. It had that spoiled confidence of boys who had never been told no. Boys who assumed every space belonged to them. Alyssa stopped, her expression neutral, but her posture shifting almost imperceptibly, not confrontational, but prepared. She had trained for years to read body language, and there said everything she needed to know, reckless, entitled, and itching to show off. She tried anyway, because experience had taught her that not every situation deserves escalation. "You hit her car," she said. "You need to." But she didn't finish the sentence, because one of them, taller, loudest, the kind who had been cheered for being physical his whole life, put a hand on her shoulder and shoved her apart. Alyssa went down, gravel scraping across her palms, the sting bright and sudden, but she didn't flinch, didn't cry out, didn't give them the satisfaction they were expecting. The freshman girl gasped, but the two boys, secure in their imagined superiority, laughed as if the shove was the punchline to a great joke. What they didn't know was that Alyssa had been knocked off her feet under mortar fire in a foreign valley and had stood up then too. This wasn't even a bruise in comparison. She stood slowly, brushing dirt from her jeans with motions so controlled that the laughter died mid-chuckle. She didn't glare. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. But the look she gave them was the kind men in boot camp hoped never to receive. The look of someone measuring their threat level and deciding they weren't even in the same weight class. What had begun as a random afternoon had just changed trajectories, and the boys didn't realize yet how dramatically. Alyssa scanned the rooftop corners without turning her head. There, a parking camera with perfect angle. Good. She didn't need fists. She needed facts. She stepped closer, her voice still calm. "You just assaulted a federal officer," she said, not dramatically, just plainly, as if reading weather conditions. The athletes blinked, confused. One managed, "What? You're not a—" She cut him off not with words, but with speed. Before either realized she'd moved, she plucked their phones from their back pockets. Clean, tactical, fluid. Years of training distilled into 2 seconds. They stared at her, stunned. She continued, The footage plus your phones means this won't disappear. You pushed me. You hit her car. You're done. The younger girl looked back and forth between them in disbelief, because Alyssa didn't look like the kind of woman who could dismantle careers. She looked like a grad student on a lunch break, and that was the point. People see what they expect to see, and these boys had expected girl. Instead, they got Seal. Alyssa dialed before they could respond. The number she called was one very few had, and the person who answered was even rarer. The university athletic director, retired Marine colonel, who owed Alyssa a debt that no one else on campus would ever hear about. When campus security arrived minutes later, they found two athletes silent and panicked, a freshman shaken but safe, and Alyssa standing with the quiet patience of someone who had already calculated every possible outcome and chosen the one that guaranteed accountability. And that backpack found at dawn, the one with commendations and ribbons, would soon be connected to the woman who had ended two college sports careers in a single afternoon, not with violence, but with evidence, discipline, and the calm authority of someone who had earned respect the hard way, one battlefield at a time. When the colonel stepped out of his black university vehicle and crossed the parking lot, every student within sight instinctively moved back, sensing a shift in atmosphere without understanding why. Campus security parted for him, and the two athletes who just minutes earlier had been so loud, so smug, so certain of their own untouchable status, found themselves shrinking under a stare forged in sand, steel, and decades of command. Colonel Abrams was a man who had known war long before these boys had known varsity sports, and while the retirement had given him civilian clothing and a quieter job title, nothing had softened him. He did not look at them first. He looked at Alyssa, and that alone told everyone present everything they needed to know. "Commander Gaines," he said, giving the kind of respectful nod reserved only for those who had earned it. The boys blinked. Commander? Gaines. That name suddenly meant something far more than they had assumed. The freshman girl watched with wide eyes as Alyssa nodded back, neither saluting nor stiffening, just acknowledging an old colleague in a different battlefield. The colonel finally turned to the boys, and his voice was calm, not angry, not raised, but with the weight of leadership that had once moved battalions. "Explain yourselves." Their mouths opened, but excuses collided in their throats. One stammered something about misunderstanding, about thinking Alyssa was interfering, about not knowing. That word, not knowing, became an anchor in the colonel's expression. "So you put your hands on a woman because you didn't know who she was?" he asked, tone dropping colder. "Is that your defense?" They froze, pale with realization. The freshman girl stepped forward, perhaps for the first time finding her voice, and said softly, "They hit my car. She just tried to help." The colonel looked at the dented fender, then the crushed grocery bag still sitting near Alyssa's car, evidence of a quiet afternoon interrupted. "This campus," he said slowly, "has many students who have worn uniforms, who have served, who have seen things you will never be able to imagine. But most of them do not announce it." He gestured subtly toward Alyssa. "Some, in fact, have served at levels you will never reach." The boys looked at Alyssa as if seeing her for the first time, not a stranger, not a woman, but something entirely outside the limits of their understanding. Alyssa didn't need to say a word. The colonel continued, "You assaulted a United States Navy SEAL, an active duty officer, without provocation." The security guards looked at each other. "SEAL? As in no SEALs?" Alyssa simply folded her hands behind her back, calm as a soldier waiting for debrief. The colonel gestured to the nearest camera. "The footage will confirm everything. This will not be handled privately." He turned to the security chief. "I want written statements, incident reports, copies forwarded to the legal department and the university conduct board." The boys tried again, pleading, promising, suddenly discovering humility they'd never needed before. One begged, "Please, sir, we didn't mean, intent is irrelevant," the colonel said. "Impact is what matters." Alyssa watched them with no triumph, no vengefulness. Just the reserved neutrality of someone who had seen far worse men crumble for far greater offenses. The freshman girl stood close to her, still shaken, still processing that someone she'd never met had stepped between her and bullies without hesitation. The colonel folded his arms. "Your athletic scholarships are suspended effective immediately pending full administrative review. You will not participate in any team activities, and depending on final findings, your enrollment itself may be at risk. The boys' faces drained of color, not only because they might lose scholarships, but because their identities, futures, and dreams had been built on sports, and those careers were now on a threat. One of them looked at Alyssa, directly, desperate, searching for disbelief, salvation, anything. She held his gaze briefly, and then spoke for the first time since the colonel arrived. "This didn't have to happen," she said quietly. "All you had to do was treat people with respect." He swallowed, unable to respond. The colonel gave a short nod toward Alyssa. "Is there anything further you want to add, Commander?" She shook her head once. "The process is enough." It was the most SEAL-like response possible, justice through structure, not emotion. Colonel Abrams gave instructions to security, then looked at Alyssa with a different expression, softer at the edges. "Still doing cleanup work, even off duty, I see." Alyssa allowed herself the smallest smile. "Bad habit," he grunted, almost amused. "We could use more habits like that." The freshman girl now looked at Alyssa with something close to awe. You're really a Navy SEAL?" Alyssa turned, her voice suddenly gentle again. "Yeah, but that's just a job. More important than that, no one deserved to be treated the way they treated you." The younger girl blinked as if no one had ever said something like that aloud for her. The colonel gave a final order and then dismissed the scene, signaling that the official wheels were now in motion. Campus security escorted the two athletes away. No handcuffs, no dramatics, but the silence around them was heavier than restraints. Students whispered from across the lot, not understanding details, but knowing something extraordinary had just happened. Alyssa turned to the freshman girl. "Are you all right?" The girl nodded slowly. "No one's ever stood up for me like that." Alyssa didn't say you should start standing up for yourself, not yet, because the girl was still processing shock. Instead, she simply gave her a card with a number written on it. Not her personal phone, but a Navy guidance line she sometimes used to connect young people with crisis or mentor support. "If you ever need help, real help, call that," she said. "There are people who will stand with you." The girl looked at the card as if it weighed more than a piece of paper. "Thank you." Alyssa nodded once and began heading back toward her car. She paused only long enough to glance at the crushed bag from earlier, picking it up with a faint sigh. She had not come here today to fight, to lecture, to expose anyone. She had come for lunch. But life rarely gives warnings before placing someone in the exact position where their training, their character, and their history become necessary. And as she got into her car, watching security vehicles drive away with the two boys who had believed they ruled the world, Alyssa reflected, not with satisfaction, but with a soldier's pragmatic clarity, that sometimes justice wasn't delivered in distant countries or complex missions. Sometimes it happened in a parking lot on a quiet afternoon when the world assumed you were nobody worth noticing, until it realized how wrong it was. In the days that followed, the story of the parking lot incident moved through the university like a rumor that no one quite believed at first, because the idea that a young woman, someone who looked barely older than some of the students, was not only military but a highly decorated Navy SEAL, didn't fit the stereotypes people were comfortable with. Yet every time security replayed the footage, every time the colonel spoke with legal, every time the athletes were called into disciplinary hearings, the truth became undeniable. The world around them had mistaken quiet strength for weakness and paid the price. Alyssa didn't return to campus immediately. Her life resumed its disciplined rhythm. Morning runs, classified briefings, operational planning, and late-night phone calls with her sister. But the university kept calling with follow-up questions, not because anyone doubted her account, but because institutions are slow, procedural machines, and fairness demanded a documented, transparent process. The athletes' families arrived on campus soon after, furious and defensive, demanding explanations, meetings, exceptions, some arguing that boys will be boys, others insisting Alyssa had overreacted, but the colonel handled all of it the same way he had handled battlefield subordinates, directly, professionally, and without yielding, reminding them that character is measured not by what a person claims to be, but by who they are when a moment tests them. One parent asked why Alyssa didn't simply forgive and move on since no real harm had been done. The colonel's response froze the room. "A Navy SEAL walked into your son's lives, and the only reason they are not facing criminal charges today is because she showed restraint. They earned discipline, not mercy, and if they learn from this, It will be the greatest education this university has ever given them. Alyssa never attended the hearings herself. She felt no need to watch accountability unfold. But she did receive updates. The athletes lost their scholarships permanently, were placed on academic probation, and were required to complete intervention and conduct restitution programs if they wished to remain enrolled at all. The freshman girl at the center of the event, once timid and frightened, found herself unexpectedly transformed by what she had witnessed. She began speaking in her classes, advocating for student safety committees, and even reporting behavior she would have previously ignored. The day after the ruling, she sent Alyssa a simple message. "You didn't just stand up for me. You showed me I was allowed to stand up for myself." Alyssa read it in silence, the way soldiers often receive gratitude, knowing that gestures matter, but not dwelling on them. She looked at her reflection in the window that evening and saw the familiar mix of strength and weariness, the cost of being someone the world depended on even when she wanted to slip through a day unnoticed. She could have taken the easy route, walked away, avoided involvement, kept her identity and her mission compartmentalized the way operators often do. But something in that moment had reminded her of countless young recruits, men and women who arrived at training with soft voices and lowered eyes, unsure of whether they mattered, until someone showed them they did. A week later, Alyssa returned to the campus for a meeting unrelated to the incident, Navy recruitment outreach, something she did when schedules allowed, and the same janitors who had found the mysterious backpack approached her during a classroom setup. They didn't ask for a photo or a signature. They simply said, "We know who you are, and thank you." Alyssa gave a small nod, thinking of all the moments in her service when the greatest victories were not medals or missions, but the quiet changes made in ordinary lives. After the presentation, she crossed the same parking lot where everything had occurred, and this time, as she passed students, they gave her space not out of fear, but respect, the kind learned not from rank, but revelation. She stopped beside her car and took a moment before opening the door, taking in the ordinary afternoon light, realizing that despite all the operations she had deployed into, despite rescues, battles, and classified actions that would never be written into public history, it was this small campus confrontation that had sparked more immediate change in real people than some missions ever could. The freshman girl was across the lot, talking confidently with another student, standing taller, shoulders squared, transforming in small but visible ways. Alyssa allowed herself a faint smile, not prideful, but quietly satisfied. Justice could be loud, and justice could be subtle, but real justice was always traced to a single choice: step forward or stay silent. She had stepped forward because it was instinct, training, and responsibility, but also because she remembered what it was like to be young and alone in a world that didn't always listen. When she finally drove off, no applause followed, no announcement, no dramatic music, just the hum of an engine and the steady breath of a soldier returning to her own life. She would train again tomorrow, deploy again when called, face dangers and missions that would never reach a headline. But in the small corner of the world she had touched that afternoon, two arrogant young men learned humility, a frightened girl discovered her voice, and an entire campus learned that legends don't always arrive in uniform. Sometimes they walk alone with grocery bags, unnoticed until the moment the world finds out exactly who they are.